Hi there, I'm Rebecca and a really warm welcome back to my channel, created by Rebecca. This week's video is the first of 4 which are going to take us screaming into spooky season. Let's get started. I love decorating for autumn or fall, and I also love decorating for Halloween, even though it's a really short time frame. Behind me are a selection of things that I have made both on this channel, on my other channel, not on this channel, and I think it would be really fun to spend 4 weeks, a bit like Advent but for spooky season, making things that I can add to this collection of decor. Last year on this channel I made this little wreath, which is like a little garden gate, and lots of mushrooms and acorns, and I used a bit of felt. Now, you may also have seen on this channel that I started needle felting at Christmas, and I pretty much fell in love. So I'm going to be making things that will definitely fit with this more autumnal aesthetic, but also full on Halloween. Today's project is going to involve the ever popular theme of toadstools, and I'm going to be using this IKEA terrarium, I want to call it. It's like a lantern terrarium. It's called Starked, and I bought this a couple of years ago, to be honest, with this kind of project in mind, but not really knowing how I was going to make it. But since I started needle felting, all became clear. This opens from the top, so it's going to make it pretty easy to fill it, unlike my lantern at the back here with my crypt scene. That was really hard to build, and I never put the glass back in. I've just left it without the glass, and I think that's fine. I think that it's nice that you can look at it without any reflections on it. But what I'm going for with these projects is more of an apothecary hedge witch kind of feel, sort of crafty specimen jar, potions, all those sorts of things. That's the avenue I'm taking, rather than scary spooky. So since I started with my needle felting, I've been buying lots of wool. I've learned a lot about wool and what's good for needle felting and what is harder to work with. Not less suitable, harder to work with. I think everybody starts with sort of a kit that's got merino tops in it, and they're lovely and smooth and soft and beautifully combed out, but actually for a beginner they're quite hard to work with, they're quite hard to felt. So actually it's easier to start with wool that's carded, and I go to a company called World of Wool a lot. I don't go there, go online to World of Wool. They have all sorts of different wools. Here they've got a Dragon Tones mixed bag. They do all sorts of mixed bags. You get really good quantities of lovely coordinating colours. Here's a 250 gram bag of their carded Perendale bat in sandstone. This is brilliant for core wool. I really enjoy using it for core wool. It felts up really nicely. What I struggle with when I'm looking online is understanding what 250 grams of wool looks like. So, you know, that to give you an idea, that's what 250 grams looks like. I've also got some New Zealand needle felting wool from a company called thefeltbox.co.uk. I think I might have bought this from Amazon because I needed it really quickly for something. I must needle felt. But you can see they've got lots of colours in this particular sort, and I wonder if that's got a weight on it. So this is 100 grams, and you can see that there's clearly a difference in the way that this has been tightly packed in its packaging compared to 250 grams. But I think it's easy to think that maybe 100 grams isn't very much when you're thinking in terms of food. That's not going to go very far. But actually 100 grams of wool is quite a bit. And if you're just using little tiny bits for projects, then, that's going to last you a long time. But you're going to want colours. Hobbycraft do in their knit and stitch range felting bumper bags. And generally in these packs they will give you a selection of solid colours. And these are, as you can see, nice little carded balls of wool. But then in most of them you also get these really fun blends. So you're going to do your main felting with this, and then maybe if you were doing a horse's mane or something, or a lion mane, you would felt across the top here to secure it to something, and then you just have all this loose and lovely colour variation. I don't know which ones I'm going to be using for these projects yet. I've got my photographic references that I'm going to be working from, and we'll just see how we get on and what I decide to use, and I will try and tell you which ones I'm using. But basically you could go somewhere like World of Wool and probably grab a nice mixed bag of stuff, and that would give you what you need. Or you could go to Hobbycraft and pick up one of their bags of carded wool. Brain froze then. and you could make quite a few things with that will go quite a long way for you. Now, I am not a professional or an expert. I am just a very enthusiastic amateur, but I've got myself some nice pieces of equipment because actually they do make your life a lot easier. I've got this lovely wool felting pad this is from Annie's Hand Felted Creations. I think I got this on Etsy, so I will link her shop. And you see it's got a dark side and also a light side, which unfortunately is covered with Katie hair, I'm afraid. That's one of my miniatured accents. But a quick roll over with a lint roller would help with that. I've got one of these Clover multi-needle felting tools. So this has 3 needle felting needles in it. These are triangle needles, I think, and they do make it really quick. With having 3 needles going at once rather than a single is definitely quicker. There's a couple of other things we can talk about which I am going to be using for these projects, multiple projects. Don't worry, I'm not going to go through this every single time. I will just refer you back to the first video. These are called locks, and they are the most textured bits of the wool. They tend to be sort of the ends of the fleece, and they get cut off and dyed into some amazing colours. So this is Devon and Cornwall long wool, and it's called Truly Autumnal, and it's from a company called TregaverFibre, and I got this from Etsy. This pack of locks is called Moss Mix. Now that's a lot more subtle than how it looked in the photograph, so just beware that things may not quite look how you thought they might. It's a natural fibre, it's going to take dye differently, and not every bag is going to look exactly the same. Is naturals, and that's a lovely mix. So that's going to be fun. That's going to add some details. So the first thing I'm going to reach for is some of my carded Perendale bat, and that's because I want to make a mound that my toadstools can sit on, and it's going to look like we've taken a trowel, dug up this little clump of toadstools, and now we're keeping them as a specimen in this terrarium. So I think this is actually quite a good size. I'm going to be putting a top coat on this for the mound to make it nice and green. So I'm just beginning to firm up this top surface. I can peel it off the mat, I can go in underneath trying to keep my other hand well out of the way. I have got finger protectors for when I get into slightly finer work, but for the moment this is just fine. And I am always trying to aim down into the mat rather than at me. Now I do watch a channel called Felt by Philippa. She is awesome, and she has 2 miniature Dachshunds just like I do. That's pure coincidence, not fangirling. Okay. And you can keep checking that it's going to be the right sort of size. I don't want it to be too tall because my toadstools are going to be quite tall. But I just want it to make a nice shape at the bottom. These core wools are great because they're not processed quite as much. It makes them more economical to buy and use. This is lichen and it's from the World of Wool Dragon Colours. I'm only going to take a little bit of this to start with because I think the toadstools are going to take up quite a lot of space on top of that mound, so I don't want to run away with myself and put too much down because that's just a waste of lovely dyed wool. And I think it's going to pay me to use the clover brush for this, so I could put my felt pad down, put that on top. And this is how this works. So you're just literally tapping into the bristles of the brush, and then you can quite easily pull that off, but you can see that's just started to lightly knit together into a sheet. And it means you can build these nice layers up. I think this is pretty good for doing 2D felting. Like I say, I'm not aiming to make this a complete dense sheet. I just want it to start to cover the majority because there's going to be so much else going on this mound. So I'm not remotely worried about bare spots, that it's not going right to the bottom. It doesn't matter. And then I'm just quickly tacking it onto the dome. That's working really nicely. And that's looking superb in there. For my research, I've been watching YouTube videos from Felt by Philippa, Living Felt, Serafina Fibre Art. Let's see if there's anybody else. You can see all the rest of the things I've been watching. Dano Does Things, the Felt Hub. So there's lots of really excellent tutorials out there. And ideas that they're happy for you to use to make your own things. This is for my home decor. This is not, I'm not selling this, but lots of them are quite happy for you to make and sell their designs. I've also been doing lots of research on the sorts of toadstools we could do. I think for this one I am going to do the Fly Agaric, which is the sort of classic toadstool. I did think that I might do, let me see, is it the panther cap is rather beautiful. I got a lot of my information from this website, which is wildfooduk.com, and it does tell you whether they are okay to eat or not, but that's not what this is about, so don't please take my word for these things. But they have lots of photographs of these particular types of toadstool and mushroom, but they also tell you the average sizes, the average width of the cap. They show you whether they've got gills or not, whether they've got skirts on the stem. They give you the diameters of the stem. So actually as a resource for somebody making something to emulate something that's real, this is a really useful website. It does sections so you can see the shape that it makes underneath. Really, really useful. Yeah. So I can highly recommend going to Wild Food UK if you want to make lifelike looking toadstools and mushrooms, because yeah, it's brilliant. It's the best site I found. It gave me lots of different images. It shows them things at different stages. These ones have obviously been half eaten by slugs. Early development, what it's looking like when it's towards the end of its life. Brilliant. So the Fly Agaric can be around 8 to 14 centimetres tall. That's the total fungi with the cap and the stem. Cap width about 8 to 14 again, so as wide as it is tall, and the stem is usually about 1 to 2 centimetres in diameter. So I thought it would be nice to have maybe 3 stages of development, if that's not being too bold. Another useful piece of kit is a simple barbecue skewer. I'm just going to start to wind some core wool on, quite nice and tight. Give it a few turns, and then I'll hold it, and then just with a single needle I will give it a few pokes, but I do not want to hit the wooden skewer with any sort of power at all. It's alright to tap it, but don't really bash into it because you will snap your needle. The other thing to do maybe is come diagonally across it. Right, and turn that over. And just tack it. And then I can pull the wool. It's quite thick actually, so we can thin a chunk of that out. And then I can start to pull the wool in almost a 45-degree angle to get me the sort of height that I am looking for. So that's 15 centimetres. So I probably don't want it any longer than that. You could mark the length on your skewer. That would be clever. And just poke the wool from different directions, because that is all knitting the fibres together in different directions, which makes it stronger and stronger and stronger. Now that's already looking quite a good thickness, but I have to remember that it's going to shrink quite a bit once I take the skewer out and start to compress this more. So I will put another fine bit of this on the top, and we're going to make one end ever so slightly thicker. From what I can see, the Fly Agaric has a fairly consistent stem going up. Some of them are very bulbous at the bottom, but but this particular variety seems to be fairly straight up and down. Using my clover pen just to make the end a little bit more rounded. You find that as you're felting with one particular needle, they'll reach a point where this one doesn't really go in anymore. It's fine up here, it's doing good stuff, but then you get to a firmer bit and you're barely getting into the surface. That's the time to swap down to finer needles, because it's basically telling you that you've felted enough with that particular needle, and now to continue consolidating you need to come down in size, because the gaps between the fibres are getting smaller and smaller. So now I've made myself 3 varying height stems, and I'm going to wrap them in a paler carded wool. This one is from the feltbox.com, from the greys and browns pack. I don't think it's going to matter too much if we see a little bit of the core wool coming through. There we go, 1 stem. Now I'm making a little skirt which goes on around the top of the stem, like just like this, and then the cap will sit on top. So I'm doing this on the medium and the largest stems. The smallest one won't get one because I'm going to make it a sort of a closer ball, like it's a new toadstool emerging. And from the pictures I can see they don't have those yet. So I'm making a strip. And I've turned the edge to just try and make it as crisp as possible. I'm going to use my finger protectors to help me try and crisp this edge up a little bit. There are special guards that you can get, or you can make something out of cardboard just to be able to pinch it flat, and then you're basically poking the loose fibres back into the edge to make it really nice and crisp. I'm felting the top edge and part way down the skirt, but I don't want to attach this edge at all. I want to maintain that edge, and in fact I'm going to try and sort of emphasise it a little bit more. Just felting those 2 sides together so that they disappear. And then I'm going to start coming down underneath the skirt to try and emphasise the gap in between the stem and the skirt. And the skirts are all quite different, and sometimes they flare really far away from the stem, and sometimes they come back and touch. And that's where reference photos come in really, really importantly, so that you can look at real examples in nature and see exactly what's going on, how these things attach, how they grow, how they age. Because remember, this is supposed to be a slightly older one, because it's the tallest of the three. There you can see how I've just sort of tacked some bits back to the stem to give that fluting. So I could take some of this slightly greyish scrap wool that I've got lying around. It's got some of the core wool, it's got some of that grey from the felting pad. I could actually poke that up underneath like that. That would help push out those shapes, but also because it's slightly darker, it will create almost a shadow under there. As opposed to that side. And there we go. And then turn this in to make a nice firm little shape. I am going to put my finger guards back on. So then my plan is to mould this down and around so we get that kind of golf ball shape. So let's first of all get this attached to the stem. I've decided I want to come down this stem a little bit, so I'm going to actually start wrapping a scarf of wool around that junction, and it's also going to help secure the cap to the stem, because at the moment it's just sort of at the top and it's just a bit wibbly wobbly. So looking at my reference, I just now want to make it a little bit wider here on the sides. I'm going to leave that one there for now and move on to the others. I've got this greyish brown from the Felt Box Grey Browns set, and I'm going to use this to do the gills, the underside of the cap, and I'm going to mix it. Yes, I will mix it with that light colour as well. And that should give us a really good mushroom colour. And I don't want or need it to be really blended. I'm going to make myself a ball, and that is going to form the underside of the cap. So we can see here on this cut through section that the red-orange colour comes down around the edge, and then when it meets exactly this point, that's when you get the white gills. It's purely that top curve that gets that colour, because we need to know where the red has to stop. So you can just start to see a white flare on that one. I think as it ages, you start to see the gills turn upwards and outwards ever so slightly. So we want that to be a nice crisp edge. Right, I've just got a bit of the red Hobbycraft wool. I'm just going to start working it in a similar way to the way I did the underside. Roughly make it into a circle. Now I don't think I want that any bigger, so what I'm going to do is put them together and see how they look. Remember, this one is going to be domed over, so I want to make sure that the white blend sort of sits right up against that edge. So because it's going to get pushed down, I'm going to compact it slightly, and that's going to help beef up the middle and give us a little bit more of a dome. And I can do that quite easily by just angling my needle in like this, and it will just move all the fibres inwards, and then I'll try and keep the outer edges as narrow as I can. And I can take some of my scruffy stuff and I can de-shed my mat and use some of that in the middle. That's doing two jobs. That's cleaning up my mat and giving me some bulk for the centre there. Another quick mention from my best friend. His mum was taking up spinning, and she made this beautiful cone of yarn, but she never got further than this sort of first twist, which is a shame, but I've been able to use it for all sorts of things. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use this to make the gills. Just by wrapping it. And I'm not wrapping tightly. have to go quite gentle with this stuff because it will just pull apart. But I've been able to use it for so many different projects. Doesn't matter if it doesn't stay dead center, because obviously the stem has a thickness, so it's going to hide that little wobble. I think that looks pretty cool, and I could go on and on and on and on with that. So obviously mushrooms have a lot of gills. What I am going to do is just tack this in. She says hopefully it is wool. If not, I'll just pop some more scrap on the top. That would fix it. Yeah, I think that's going to look fantastic. Right, so first thing I'm going to do is tack those layers together. I'm just really compacting this central bit where the stem sits in so that it helps it have that domed shape. That's better, that's starting to come down more. I can always reduce this. This is still quite fluffy. So using a Heidi Feathers gold needle, which is one of her finest, I'm just using it to tack the outside edge of the gills to the outside edge of the red upper. And I don't think I'm going to do any of this firming to this middle section. I want this to be a little bit more puffed like gills would be. So I'm concentrating this needlework in the centre and out on the edges. I'm not worried too much that I've got that colour coming through. You know, it's nature, there's always going to be variation, but also I am going to be putting more reds on top. The orangey colour is more focused around the edge, whereas it's deeper up here at the top. So I'm going to add another piece of the carded wool up onto the top here. And then I can kind of lay over some wisps of the orange, or I can mix some of the red with the orange to soften that. I've skipped ahead a little bit. Here's the one that I have finished on screen with you, and then I went ahead and I made a much older looking top for the bigger stem. But I thought it would be fun to add a little bit of colour and texture. You can see where I've pushed in the scrap wool. It's kind of tinted the top surface, and if I continue to sort of felt into that, a little bit more comes to the surface and you get sort of blemishes. And because this is a natural thing, that's quite nice. So I'm going to continue adding blemishes. Yeah, I like that. And as you can see, I've tried to flare up the edge of the gill section a bit more so that we don't get that more neat underturned edge that we're getting on the younger one. We're definitely seeing more of that gill area. Now yes, I have got some of the top coat coming through into the underside, but I don't mind that. It's adding texture and colour, and because it's going to be in there in that terrarium, you're really not going to be able to see that. You can also see that I've added more sort of the orange, but I've added sort of yellow ochre colours, creams, just to try and make it look older. I'm just going to kind of felt in some random strands of deeper colours. I'm not sort of focusing in a straight line. I just want random sort of swirly marks. Maybe they're a bit darker down at the bottom because that's where they're in contact with the soil. And this is all very much about the surface layer now. It's not about firming the core of the shape. I'm going to see if I can do some of these flaky bits that I mentioned. I'm going to try and do it with some of this pale wool. It'll be a little bit tricky to make it look like a lip of sort of surface layer that's pulled off, but let's see what we can do. I'm going to go ahead and add a little bit of that dryness to the bottom of both of these as well, and I'll see you back here when I've done that. So next I think I will attach the caps to the toadstools. Then we can add the warts on, and then we can put it all together. I'm just poking through the cap and into the stem. Trying to stay nice and localised over the very top. I can also come this way. This little bit of felt was a little bit looser. I hadn't felted this bit really hard, so that means I can use that to help it grip on. And there we go. That's that one done. So now it just needs its warts putting on. And then the bigger, older one. It's now the next day and I've just finished adding a little bit more of a bright red to the caps, just to give a bit more variation, and I've also finished adding all the warty flecks to the baby and the oldest of the three. And now we're going to come back to the middle-sized one and start adding, or continue adding, more flecks to this. So all I've done is I've taken a bit of slightly off-white and an even smaller bit of greyish brown and just sort of mix them up, and it just takes the starkness off the white. And I'm just pulling them until they blend. There we go. And then I can just take a minute pinch, twiddle it round in my fingertips, and there we get another little warty bit. And I'm referring back to my my reference pictures all the time for placement and frequency and shape. These ones are actually a little bit more regular than I'd intended, so I'm going to random them up a little bit. The more I look at these sort of flaky warts, the more they remind me of really badly applied icing. Sort of piped dots, but they're just not dots by any stretch of the imagination. And you're not really trying to felt them into the top. You really do want them sort of poking up and being a bit random. And then if you don't like it, because you're only lightly applying this, you can take it off again and move it or stretch it out a bit or make it a bit more circular. Completely up to you. But I just keep referring to my reference image, which is right over there. And I use different reference images for each of the different size toadstools, so that I was getting the sort of spacing pretty much right for each stage of growth. They're not absolutely accurate, obviously, but you know, I've done my best. And you'll see I'm sort of swapping around between the blue topped needle and the gold topped needle. So if I want something to just be a little bit more pushed in, or adjust the shape a bit more aggressively, I can do that with the blue one, whereas the gold one just sort of really is the finishing needle. So it's the one that you would try and take down all your loose fibres by going sort of across the surface, that sort of thing. So yeah, if you want to make changes to your little warty flakes, then the blue one is the better way to go. But if you find that's being a bit heavy-handed, then just swap over to the gold one. So if you're making little tiny balls and you try and poke that in with the blue one, they can disappear in very quickly, which isn't really what you want it to do. And I think if you're trying to make these look really natural, then it's pretty hard to go wrong with them. It's only if you try and make them really, really round and perfect that they will start to look unnatural and a bit cartoonish. And you just sort of have to get your head in the right place that for them to look natural, they're going to be really random, not specially pretty. And yeah, that's just how they are. So you might start with a round shape, but actually with a little bit of poking you might end up with more of an elongated shape, or you might try and turn that into two shapes by poking it in the middle like that. One bigger, one smaller, and I say just keep looking at your reference pictures, because then you'll realise what a variety of shapes there are. Because the terrarium is 360 view, it means that I have got to think about every single side of the sculpture. If it had a back, or maybe it was a shadow box, then obviously you've only got to really think about the front face. Now we can start to look at how we're going to place the toadstools in the composition. Odd numbers are always nice because they feel more balanced. But you can have the bigger one standing slightly off to one side, probably not too far to one side, because I've got to think about the shape of the lantern top to the terrarium. But there could be a little bit more space between those two, and then the two younger ones could be nearer to each other. That would work. And I have got a bit of flexibility, so if I want to sort of bend the stems around a little bit once we're ready, then I can do that. So I've actually lifted the mound up. Once I've located where I want the stem to be, and I can start to poke up into the stem very carefully, because I've got lots of loose fibres here. This isn't too compacted, so I can start to drive those up into the stem. Just doing it slowly and not being too aggressive with the movement, because I really don't want to go straight through into my finger. But there we go, that has secured that really nicely to get started with the rest of the arrangement. And this is a 30, probably a 38 spiral, maybe a 36 spiral. So it really is sort of driving the fibres in. Again, nice and slow. And there's number 2. And you can see how that would look a bit awkward if they were all equally spaced apart. It wouldn't look very realistic. So I am going to bring this one in closer to this mushroom toadstool thing. So just a quick tack from this side and then turn over. and carefully poke through from the underneath. Now we might want to just add a little bit more bulk underneath the tallest one, just to elevate it a little bit. And I can do that with some of this scrap wool that I've de-shed from here. Now I'm going to start to build up some variety in the base here. And I've got some different coloured greens, and I've also got the locks that I can start to add in as well. I've also got browns that I can add. Let's not forget I said that I wanted it to look like it had just been dug up out of the woodland. So any sort of natural neutral colours I can add to this will add interest. And then I can just start to take pieces of the locks and start to add them in. And I've got a really lovely range of colours and textures here, so I can really pick and choose. It's going to be nice to be able to sort of run some of these up the sides of the toadstools once we get to that sort of point. Don't want to get carried away too quickly though, so I'm just going to keep applying. And if you're not sure about the sort of environment that toadstools grow in, get yourself a reference. Look at forest floor where Fly Agarics grow, and that will soon help. Right, well, I think we are now ready to put it into the terrarium. I think I like how it's come together, but I think we can add a little bit more detail with some acorn caps that I've still got from last year. I've got a lovely old stick with some lichen on it. I've got some loose lichen, and I've got the little leaves that I've just needle felted, which can be sort of scattered here and there like leaf litter. And bring in the terrarium. I've got my very long terrarium planting tweezers. And there we have it, the first of this year's decorations. I think that looks pretty cool. We're going to have a closer look at it now. Isn't that fun? I think that's turned out really well, and I think it's going to look great with the rest of the decorations I'm going to be making and the ones I've already made. Yeah, so don't forget there's going to be 3 more videos in this year's spooky season, and yeah, lots more projects to come. Right, well that's it for this week's video. Thank you so much for watching. Please remember to like, share and subscribe to me here on YouTube. And until next time, bye!